all started. The beating in the rain. A volley of kicks rained down on Dana Whitfield. One caught her ribs, and the sound that left her was not a scream. It was breath leaving a body that refused to move. Her knees had already hit the wet concrete. Her arms locked around the bleeding stranger beneath her. Cole Ashford had already destroyed what mattered before he ever touched her. The vintage tank under his boot heel, keyed open in one long silver scar. Oil weeping onto rain, slicked lot now he stood over two bodies instead of one, grinning like a man who had already won. The old biker beneath her had not made a sound this whole time. He simply watched, chest rising slowly, eyes counting exits nobody else in that parking lot had thought to count. Cole leaned down, sneering, something about grandpas and their toys. The old man answered with 4 words, flat as a closed door, walk away last time. Nobody in Willow Creek knew what he carried under that jacket. To them he was just an old man who fixed lawnmowers on Tuesdays. Stay with us within 30 minutes. 500 Hells Angels turned a quiet Montana town into something the county would talk about for years. Welcome to Kindness Arena. If you believe in kindness and second chances, hit the subscribe button, like the video, comment your thoughts where you are watching from, and share. Your support keeps these powerful stories alive. Now let's go back to where it all started. Willow Creek sits low in a valley in western Montana, the kind of town where the mountains close in early and the street lights come on before anyone is ready for them to. Pete's Roadhaze had been sitting on the edge of Route 9 for longer than most of its customers had been alive, and the neon sign out front had a flicker in the letter that nobody had ever bothered to fix. Inside, the place smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease, and the vinyl booze had that particular cracked leather texture that stuck to bare skin in summer and went stiff as cardboard in the cold. Dana Whitfield had been parking her car 2 blocks down for the better part of a month. 6 weeks ago she had an apartment and a job, checking inventory at a printing plant on the edge of town. Then the plant closed its doors on a Friday with no warning, and by the following Friday her landlord had changed the locks. She hadn't told her sister in Billings. She hadn't told anyone. Pride was the last thing she had left, and she guarded it the way other people guarded their savings. She still picked up shifts at Pete's twice a week, enough to keep gas in the tank and something in her stomach, and on the nights that she wasn't working, she sat in her car under the sodium light behind the diner, telling herself this was temporary. This was just a rough patch. This was not who she was. Inside, Pete smelled the way it always had, burnt coffee, bacon fat, and under it faintly, the diesel drifting off the highway every time. A truck downshifted past a lot the jukebox in the corner hadn't worked in years, but somebody kept feeding it quarters anyway out of habit more than hope. Dana knew that smell better than she knew her own apartment now, because her own apartment no longer existed. There was a night the motorcycle came through. It was a 1968 Harley Panhead painted a deep forest green that had gone dull with decades of weather, and the man who rode it killed the engine and sat there a moment before he got off like he needed to listen to the silence first. He was broad through the shoulders in a way that comes from decades of work rather than a gym. Somewhere in his 60s with a gray beard trimmed close and a face that had clearly seen more winters than most people. His name was Walter Doyle, around Willow Creek. The handful of people who knew him had all called him Hawk on account of the way he used to watch a room before he ever said a word. In it he walked toward the diner door, then stopped. His eyes had caught something in the shadow past the dumpster, a shape still deliberately still, the way a person gets when they're trying very hard not to be noticed. He didn't call out. He didn't approach. He just filed it away and went inside for a moment. The whole lot seemed to hold its breath. Rain ticking on the dumpster lid, a shape pressed into the dark, holding perfectly, still breathing as quietly as her lungs would allow that single frozen second. A woman deciding whether tonight was a night she finally asked a stranger for help, and deciding again that it wasn't. Said more about the last 6 weeks of her life than any sentence could have. 10 minutes later he came out carrying a paper bag and a foam cup, and instead of walking to his bike, he set both down on the dry concrete near the dumpster, gave a small nod toward the shadow, went and sat on the curb with his back to her. He'd spent enough years around people who'd learned to survive, by staying invisible, to know that cornering one of them was the fastest way to lose them. Dana didn't move for a long moment, and the smell of hot food won out over caution meatloaf gravy, the kind of smell that undoes a person who hasn't eaten a real meal in days, and she crept out, took the bag, and retreated. Eat slow, Hawk said without turning around. Stomach's not going to thank you if you rush it. It was the first sentence anyone had spoken to her all week that wasn't a question about money. She didn't have any answer. She just ate slowly, sitting on the cold ground with her back against the brick, and somewhere around the third bite her hand started shaking and didn't stop. She hadn't finished the food when the night changed shape. Headlights swung hard off the highway, and a lifted black bus came into the lot too fast. The kind of fast that says a driver wants to be noticed. Bass thumped through the windows before the doors even opened. 3 young men climbed out. Cole Ashford in front. 23 years old, the only son of the man who owned every car lot on the east side of the county, and behind him his 2 friends Derek Malone and Grant Kessel, both drunk enough that their laughter carried across the lot before anyone said anything funny. Cole's eyes landed on the old pan, head first, and something about it seemed to offend him. "Would you look at this," he said, circling it. "Somebody's grandpa still riding around on a museum piece." He drove his boot heel into the front tire. Hawk stayed on the curb, stepped back from the bike, he said, not raising his voice at all. Cole laughed the kind of laugh that's really just a cover for being told no. He climbed up onto the saddle anyway, and as he swung his leg over the buckle, his belt dragged across the tank in one long motion, and a bright silver scar opened up in the old black paint curling like a wound. Hawk stood. He didn't lunge, didn't shout. He crossed the distance in 3 unhurried steps, closed one hand around Cole's jacket, and pulled him off the bike with a motion that looked almost gentle right up, until Cole hit the wet asphalt hard enough to knock the air out of him. "Last time," Hawk said, "walk away." Cole scrambled up, his face red now for a different reason than the beer. "You're dead, old man," he spat, and Derek and Grant were already moving. What happened next did not take long, though it would feel like a great deal, longer to everyone who lived through it. Hawk got a clean hit into Grant's ribs that folded him over, but 3 against 1 is not a fight, it's a math problem. And the math was against him. Grant tackled him into the side of the truck, while Derek came around from behind. Cole pulled a heavy steel flashlight off his belt, and the crack it made against the side of Hawk's skull was a kind of sound that ends things. Hawk went down, and once he was down, the boot started. It was the exact moment Dana's food hit the ground. Every instinct she had spent a month sharpening told her to stay in the shadows. Stay invisible meant stay safe, and she had believed that with her whole chest for 6 weeks straight. But she looked at the blood starting to spread under the only man in this town who had looked at her like a person instead of problem, and something in her simply refused the instruction. She was across the lot before she decided to move. "Stop," she said with her voice cracking down the middle. "Leave him alone." She didn't try to fight them, as she knew exactly how that would go. She threw herself over Hawk's body instead, curling her back over his head and shoulders, and locked both hands into the collar of his jacket like she intended to die holding on. Cole stood over her, chest heaving, staring down at the shape covering his target as if it had appeared out of nowhere. "Get off him," he said. "This isn't your business." "Please," Dana said. "As an old man, you're going to kill him. We're not done," Cole said, and grabbed a fistful of her jacket to pull her off. She didn't let go. "Fine," he said, "have it too." Then a volley of kicks rained down on Dana Whitfield. One caught her ribs, and the sound that left her was not a scream. It was breath leaving a body that refused to move. She bit down until she tasted copper and did not release her grip. Beneath her, Hawk was surfacing through a fog with a blow to his head, and what he understood in that half-second broke something open in his chest that had nothing to do with pain. A woman he had known for exactly 10 minutes was taking a beating meant for him. He managed to roll enough to get one arm around her, and that was when his jacket came loose at the collar. Torn open from the fight, and the leather cuts underneath caught the diner's neon light 3 patches. Sat stitched across the back a top rocker in red letters that read Hell's Angels, a bottom rocker that read Montana, and between them, grinning up into the rain, a winged skull. Derek froze mid-swing. "Cole," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Look at his back." Cole looked down, and every drop of color left his face at once. Even rich kids in this county knew exactly what that patch meant, and what it meant was that you did not touch the man wearing it, and you certainly did not send him to the hospital. "It's fake," Cole said mostly to himself. "Has to be fake. I don't care if it's fake." Grant said, already backing toward the truck. "We need to go right now." Cole delivered one last kick to Dana's hip, a small, ugly attempt to leave the last word before he turned and rammed the truck, peeled out of the lot, and rammed the light at the corner of Route 9. Tail light swallowed by the storm. Silence fell over the parking lot, thick enough to hear the rain hit the puddles one drop at a time. Dana rolled off Hawk and lay flat on her back, staring up into the storm, her ribs screaming with every breath. Hawk pushed himself up onto one elbow, his face a mess of blood and bruise, and looked over at her. "You shouldn't have done that. He rasped you." "Bought me dinner," she whispered, and then her eyes rolled back. Hawk crawled to her, checked her pulse. Faint but there, knew immediately he couldn't move her without making things worse. He pulled a battered flip phone from inside his cut, dialed a number he hadn't needed in a long while, and held it down. "Yeah, Hawk," a voice answered on the second ring. It belonged to Frank Sorrento, president of the Montana Charter, a man whose calm carried more weight than most men shouting. "Frank," Hawk said, forcing the words out even. "I'm at Pete's Roadhouse, Willow Creek. I'm down bad, and there's a woman here who took a beating trying to protect me. She's hurt worse than I am. Get an ambulance out here and call the sheriff too. We do this by the book." Frank, you hear me by the book?" There was a pause on the line, and then Frank's voice came back low and steady. "Say no more, we're coming, and we're calling it improper. Sit tight." The call ended, and Hawk let the phone drop into a puddle beside him, pulled off his dry jacket, and laid it gently over Dana's shivering body, leaving himself in nothing but his blooded cut. He sat beside her in the rain, and waited for long while there was only the wind, and the ground began to hum. It didn't arrive as sound at first, it arrived as a vibration, low and rhythmic, rising up through the wet asphalt and into the soles of Hawk's boots. The puddles around them started to ripple. Then came the noise, distant at first like weather rolling in over the mountains, growing louder and more solid with every passing second, until the windows of Pete's roadhouse rattled in their frames, and the waitress inside finally worked up the nerve to look out. Headlights broke the rain, not two, not a dozen, hundreds moving as one long unbroken column of the interstate filling the lot, and then the side street sealing off that stretch of Willow Creek from the rest of the world. The air itself seemed to change. Hot exhaust hitting cold rain, until steam rose off the asphalt in thin ribbons, and the smell of scorched oil mixed with wet pine drifting down off the ridge. Behind, the diner sirens wailed somewhere in the distance and then stopped a mile out. No deputy in that county was driving a cruiser into 500 Hells Angels without backup and a plan at the front of the formation. A heavy road glide rolled to a stop, and Frank Sorrento stepped off it. He stood well over 6 feet, built like a doorway, and he didn't hurry as he crossed the lot toward the knot of members already forming a wall around the dumpster. The crowd parted without a word. Frank crouched beside Hawk first, then looked at Dana, and something in his jaw went tight. "Doc," he called out, and a lean older man with a salt and pepper ponytail pushed through the crowd and dropped to his knees beside her. Ray Halloran had spent a tour as an army medic decade before he ever put on a cut, and his hands moved over her ribs with the same steady precision they always had. "She's broken up bad, Frank. Doc said possible collapsed lung. We need an ambulance now, not in 10 minutes. Already moving a voice call from the edge of the crowd, holding up a scanner cop so the road blocked a half-mile out. "They think this is a riot." Frank's voice cut through the rain. "Ride out and escort them in. Nobody touches a cruiser, nobody blocks a road. We clear a path, and we let them do their job. That's the only way this ends clean." 3 riders peeled off into the dark. Frank knelt beside Hawk and put a hand on his shoulder. "Talk to me, brother." 3 of them, Hawk said, each word costing him something. Young Rich drove a lifted black truck, dealership plates. They went for the bike first. "I told them twice to walk away. She came out of nowhere and took the rest of it from me, Frank. She doesn't even know my name." Frank looked at Dana's still face for a long moment, and whatever was moving behind his eyes, he kept it there. Then he stood and turned to the members filling the lot behind him, and the choir that fell over 500 men was heavier than any shout could have been. 3 local men in a black lifted truck put our oldest member on the ground tonight, Frank said, his voice carrying over the wind, and when a woman who owes him nothing threw herself over him to stop it, they put their boots to her, too. A low sound moved through the crowd, something between a growl and a held breath. "Nobody reaches for a weapon," Frank said, "before anyone could. We find the truck, we find the men, we call the sheriff the second we do, and we let the law take it from there. Anybody who touches one of them before the badge shows up answers to me first." Understood. There was a long beat of silence and a chorus of assent, low and absolute. "Now go find that truck." Bikes scattered into the side streets of Willow Creek, sweeping headlights across driveways and dark yards, a whole town holding its breath behind drawn curtains a few miles out. Cole Ashford had already driven the bus into his father's private storage yard, tucked the vehicle inside a corrugated steel building crowded with boats and classic cars, and pulled the rolling door shut behind them. The building smelled of old motor oil and cold concrete, and the grease-stained floor was slick enough underfoot that Grant nearly went down twice pacing across it. The 3 of them sat in the dark, adrenaline burning off into something colder. They saw the plates. Grant said, pacing, "We're done. We're actually done. Shut up." Cole snapped, though his hands were shaking as he tried to wipe blood off his boots. "Nobody knows it's us. We wait until morning. And my dad calls the sheriff before the sheriff calls us. He knows people. You hit an old man with a Hells Angels patch with a flashlight," Grant said. "That's not a phone call your dad can fix." Cole didn't answer because somewhere under the panic a small, honest voice in him had already started saying the same thing. He reached for his phone anyway, and that was when the hum started coming through the metal walls, low at first, and then unmistakable, the ground itself beginning to tremble under their boots. A single rider had followed wet tire tracks off the main road and up to the gate and made one call. Within minutes the yard outside was ringed, with motorcycles' headlights slicing through the gaps in the siding. There was no demand to open the door. Instead, a tow truck backed slowly into the rolling gate, and with one control pushed toward it wide enough to expose the 3 of them kneeling on the oil-stained concrete under a wall of headlights. Frank Sorrento walked through the gap, flanked by 2 of his men, and crossed straight to the truck, running a thick finger along the fresh scratch and paint, a perfect match for the wound in Hawk's tank. "Sheriff's on the way," one of his men said quietly. "We called it in the second we found the plates." Frank turned to Cole, who was on his knees now in tears cutting through the grime on his face. "My dad has money," Cole said. "Whatever this costs, we can please. Just don't." Frank crouched down until they were level. "This was never about money," he said. "He put a flashlight into the skull of a man old enough to be your grandfather, then a woman half your size. Covered him with her own body, and you kicked her anyway. That's not a debt you pay off. That's just who you are unless you decide to be something else starting tonight." Cole's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out behind the tremor still running through his hands. Something else was starting to surface. The plain, unbearable shape of what he had actually done, stripped of every excuse he'd been rehearsing since the parking lot. He thought of Dana's face streaked with rain and blood, refusing to let go of a man she had known for 10 minutes. He had never once in 23 years put himself between danger and a stranger. He had done the opposite of that tonight twice, too. Two people who had never done anything to him. The realization sat on his chest like a physical weight heavier than the thought of any jail cell. And for the length of one long breath, kneeling on cold concrete under 500 headlights. Cole Ashford finally understood exactly who he had chosen to be. Red and blue light swept into the yard minutes later. Two Willow Creek deputies stepped out, visibly unsettled by the crowd of leather surrounding them, and Frank walked straight to them without hesitation. "They're yours," he said. "We didn't touch them. We just made sure they didn't leave." The deputies cuffed all three men and walked them to a cruiser as they passed. Cole looked back once at the yard full of silent riders, his shoulders curling inward, his eyes dropping to the concrete before anyone told him to look away. 2 days later, Willow Creek Regional Hospital had an unofficial waiting room full of leather vests, and the staff had stopped trying to move them. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee from a nurse's station, and the low electronic beep of monitors carried through the thin walls of every room on the floor in a quiet room. On the third floor, the blanket under Dana's hands was rough. Hospital-issue cotton, nothing like the park she'd been living in for 6 weeks, and she opened her eyes to find a mountain of a man folded awkwardly into a visitor's chair, one arm in a sling, half his face taped in gauze. "Hey there, Hawks," said his voice, rough but warm. "The men," she started. "Gone, Hawks," said. "Sheriff's got them. They're not walking away from this one." She let her head fall back against the pillow, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then the door opened, and Frank Sorrento stepped in carrying an enormous bunch of yellow sunflowers, looking entirely out of place holding them. "How are we doing?" he asked gently. "Who are all of you?" Dana asked, looking at the vests, the patches, the careful way every one of them was watching her like something worth protecting. "People who don't forget," Frank said simply. "Robert Ashford's already agreed to cover every bill this hospital sends, medical and otherwise, through his lawyers. No argument. That part's handled properly. The other part," he nodded toward Hawk, "is between the two of you." Hawk took her hand. "Careful of the bruising. You didn't owe me anything." He said. "You didn't even know my name, and you still put your body between me and 3 men twice your size. I don't know many people who do that for a stranger." "I didn't think about it," Dana admitted. "I just couldn't watch it happen. That's the whole point." Hawk said. "The people worth being are the ones who don't have to think about it." Frank set the sunflowers on a windowsill and looked back at her. "For what it's worth," he said, "most folks drive right past someone sleeping in a car and never think twice. You didn't know this old man from a stranger on the street, and you still put your body in front of a beating meant for him. That's not something the club is going to forget, and it's not something this town should either." Dana looked down at her bandaged hands. "I just did what felt right," she said quietly. "I didn't think there'd be 500 motorcycles at the end of it." Hawk almost laughed, then winced at the pain it cost him. "Most good things don't come with a warning label," he said. "You just do them, and sometimes the world shows up behind you." For the first time in 6 weeks, Dana didn't feel the need to disappear into a parking lot after dark. She closed her eyes, and for once the tears that came weren't about what she'd lost. They were about the strange, unknown relief of being seen. If a story about a stranger's courage in a town that showed up for her means something to you, stay close, because Kindness Arena has more of them coming. This is where kindness gets remembered. See you in the next one.